right, so we're going to call to order the September Student Achievement Committee meeting. It's 3 o'clock, so I want to make sure we get started because we're going to have a very robust conversation on some two important topics. So before then, I will entertain a motion, but we also need a motion to amend the agenda to start with the seclusion and restraints, followed by the transforming curriculum for learning.
Motion to amend the agenda. Second.
Motion from Mr. Hershey, second from Chair Haggerty. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Nays, same sign. The ayes have it. And Dr. Wilson Norman, I will, actually, I've got to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Motion by Mr. Hershey.
Second.
Second from Dr. Ng. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nays, same sign. The ayes have it. Now I'll turn over to you, Dr. Wilson Norman. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. We are excited to be able to share an update on our seclusion and restraint, and really as we think about ensuring student well-being, and we will highlight seclusion and restraint, spring data, along with the entire year of 2024. We hope today with our desired outcomes to really be able to clearly communicate the state and federal reporting requirements, to review the 23-24 seclusion and restraint data, along with outlining next steps for 24-25. That we have a team of people here with us today who work closely with training our teams on seclusion and restraint and maintaining that data. And we will walk you through our presentation and be available to answer any questions. And so as we think about all that we do, we want to ensure that we tie everything back to our strategic plan. And when we think about behavioral health and the outcomes that we want to track and monitor in terms of student wellness, that we want to ensure we're providing a safe and inclusive environment, that we're eliminating overrepresentation by race, ethnicity, gender, and disability, and that we engage our family and community around this work. And then goal 5, overarchingly, student well-being, and just making sure that we have strategies in place to ensure that we are taking care of our students and monitoring and tracking our progress along the way. Michelle Woodson will walk you through our behavioral health framework that we use to train, coach, and support our schools.
Good afternoon. I hope you all are well. I really wanted to take the opportunity to share with you this behavioral health framework. We have been socializing this for about 6 months now with our schools and really excited about this work. And the key component to this behavioral health framework is this is for all children, right? We want to make sure that we're providing supports in place for all students to be able to be successful in their daily interactions at school, whether it's in the classroom, it's in the hallway, the cafeteria, wherever they may be. I'm going to kind of talk about these images a little bit out of order, but I want to talk about what we think of as core behavioral health, and some of our core expectations include classroom management, school-wide expectations, and social emotional learning. We want every student in every classroom and every day to have an opportunity to know what's expected of them in their classroom. So those classroom expectations need to be explicitly shared with them every day so that they have a knowledge of what's expected of them. And then we want effective classroom management strategies to be used on a regular basis. The school-wide expectations, again, should be taught to students explicitly so that they know what are the expectations when I'm walking in the hallway, when I'm in the cafeteria, when I go in the gymnasium, that they have a real clear understanding. And that is true for the beginning of the school year where we are right now. It's also true for students that might enter the school year later on, and we want to still make sure that we are explicitly teaching that. We also want to make sure that all students have access to our social emotional learning curriculum that's available to them. That is really explicit teaching in how they are able to regulate their emotions, think about what they do, collaborate, goal setting, some of those more soft skills that are available to students to help them become successful every day in their own management of their behavioral health. We always want to do this through a lens of restorative and trauma-informed practices, thinking about how we want to make sure that we are always considering where students are coming from and how we support them in reference to their background. We want to make sure that we are also conscious of repairing harm. If something has happened to a student, how do we make sure that we can bring them back to a place where all parties are able to kind of move forward based on what's occurred? And we also want to think about this in a tiered response model. So I just mentioned that we have core. That's what we expect for all students in all classrooms all the time. But we do know that there may be some students that might need some additional support, which would be at a tier 2 or a tier 3 level. And we want to provide additional targeted support based on their needs so that we can support them in that work. So I'm going to turn this over to Paul for the next conversation.
Good. Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, Committee Chair Swanson and Dr. Taylor and board members. So with this, of course, we're here to talk about seclusion and restraint, but I really want to emphasize what Ms. Woodson was just talking through. The work is, of course, far broader. I want to emphasize that this is about student well-being when we look at these particular practices. So to accomplish this, we have these two buckets on the side here, and the first there is fostering positive classrooms, which is that core work that Ms. Woodson was just speaking about. And then we have the notification to parents. This is a pillar of the work, and you're going to hear me repeat this often. If there is a need to seclude or restrain, we must have proper notification to parents the same day. Parents, they need to know. I have a child who's in elementary school. I would want to know. So notification of parents is a really key thing. I want to highlight, too, in order to foster positive classrooms, seclusion and restraint, it's not an acceptable method to utilize for a particular disciplinary issue. That's not why we have it. There are certain permissible aspects of it, but again, to ensure safety of students and staff, but it's something that we really need to use as the last resort. And sometimes it's misused for noncompliance with staff demands, disruption or punishment, and again, that's not the goal. So our focus work, when we're talking about these incidents, is to document it, report it to my office, and communicate it to families. That's the goal. So looking at this particular brief data, this is your bird's eye view as to really what's happening now based on reporting objectively. So you see we have about 160,000 students from last year. Seclusion and restraint, right? It is less than 1% based on what we reported, and we have the 403 students that had a seclusion and or restraint. So look, even though it's less than 1% at this point, each one of those students, I want to clarify, they matter. And we need to discuss this work, and this is really the thought process for the rest of it, to both monitor and reduce that number. Ms. Woodson already talked about the core support. Unless there was any specific aspects you want to continue with that?
Yeah. Let me add to that a little bit. So we want to certainly talk a little bit about how that core support is an essential component that we rely on to help reduce those incidents of seclusion and restraint. And as a district, there is district-wide professional learning and accountability measures for all employees at this point in time. So every employee working with a student is required annually to view the seclusion and restraint training site and video and read board policy 4302 and the accompanying RMP as a part of the beginning of year requirements. This year, the online legal training was updated in collaboration with Farrington Smith to clarify terminology, provide examples, and to address some of the hypothetical situations. Furthermore, we want to make sure that professional learning is available for all school administrators. A district-wide collection tool is being utilized to help ensure timely, accurate, and consistent district-wide reporting practices based on the data that we'll share today. We're confident that this will help move us closer and in a better place as we're moving forward, acknowledging that we'll always need to be in a cycle of improvement.
Thank you, Ms. Woodson. So when looking at reducing seclusion and restraint. The question for a district is how do we do that? And you see clearly we have the focus on reporting and intervention effectively. That's the key here. The goal is to have ongoing monitoring and conversations regarding this topic. And we're doing it far more than we ever have previously. And we need to do better, and we are. And our work is toward more accurate reporting and efforts to reduce the use of seclusion and restraint. As you see, it's cyclical here. And so we have to first understand and really review. We have to review. What does the data say? What's happening in our school buildings? And so we need that data to review. Then we have to understand what's happening. Why the why the seclusion and restraint? Why did it occur? What are you doing afterwards? What did you do before, right? What kind of caused the reason? And then, of course, interrupting. Now that we know what we know, how are we interrupting it? And so you see that it involves also incident reporting, as you see the particular aspects to the left of that. Incident reporting, ongoing reviews, and ending with the submission to the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction as well as the federal. And to assist the district in reviewing and understanding all these numbers, we make sure that we have a particular reporting form to do that. I want to highlight, in order to do this reporting, that we have a team that is looking at these daily, communicating and talking with schools daily about this to make sure that schools are not only aware, but they're reviewing, understanding, and interrupting about it. They're making sure that we have the video, if it exists, of it, any witness statements. So we are really focusing a lot on that information. We're also making sure that it is uploaded and given to NCDPI within that 5-day timeline, as we discussed. We're also making sure to review with special education services. We meet with them on a monthly, that's scheduled, but there's a lot of conversations in between that. All of this to say, everything you see there, it's all with the goal of making sure we understand exactly what we need to do, and we are notifying families when a seclusion and restraint may occur. So before we move on, the next things is to remind you of the definitions of what seclusion and restraint is. And then we're going to look at the data. But I think before we jump at the data, let's remind ourselves as to what it is. So there's 3 aspects here. So this is your quick visual of it. So while the definitions we're going to find is similar, especially with the 2 versions of restraint, there are some distinctions that we want to make. And then, of course, we've got seclusion. I want to really emphasize when we talk about the definitions, this is not comprehensive. The statute on this is lengthy. Our policy as well, the federal, state definitions. And so this is a snapshot of it. And so when looking at this, what does reporting and notifying look like to families? So you see the underlining aspect of professional learning. So when we look at these 2 things, there are certain permissible and there are certain impermissible. So let's look at federal aspect and state. But federal, right, it's the personal restriction that reduces the ability to move. The state is really aligned with that as well. But let's see the state. The state has this aspect. What's written in white under that definition is not part of the definition. It's just the aspect that if the student sustains an injury, the state observable injury, they want to have that reported. The federal aspect says, look, any of that aspect for physical restraint, we're going to report. And remember, when I say report, there's to the state and to the federal government. None of that excuses us, if we don't report it to the state or federal because it doesn't align, it doesn't mean parents don't get to know. They still need to know when it occurred. So we should expect that the federal numbers, the restraint numbers, to be higher than state numbers because of the reporting required differences. So I want to highlight that about federal and state. So stick with that when we make sure we go to the data. We'll highlight that. Yeah, Mr. Swanson.
Dr. Walker, Mr. Hershey had a clarifying question
So,
for us.
Sir.
so if there's no injury, we don't report it to the state? Is that what that means?
Correct.
Okay. That's it, okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and yes, and there's a list of things that are permissible, but yes, that's the short of it.
Got it.
Yes. So let's look at mechanical restraint. So another aspect, again, as students come into school, we don't ever think of a need to restrain in a sense of a mechanical way. So why do we do this, and why is this even a reporting aspect? So let's go by the definitions here. And again, these aren't the comprehensive definitions. I'm going to read it more in the sense of both definitions talk about really any device. That's the way I like to think about it. It's not always a handcuffs. It could be tying, strapping, any things of that sort. Anything that is used, a device, to restrict a child is a mechanical restraint. Really, the federal and state agree with those particular aspects. So going back to that aspect of why does this even exist? Now, there's certain things that might be permissible. Something as simple as a seat belt on a bus is a mechanical restraint. A strap to maybe hold a student in a wheelchair. If they're perhaps physically incapable of remaining seated upright, right? That's a mechanical restraint. Those are aspects permissible. That's things that parents should clearly know about. And there's various things the state says when it's appropriate as assistive technology, when it's reasonably needed to obtain possession of a weapon, self-defense. Those are things where these type of restraints can happen. So again, when to report, emphasize, anytime this happens. State, federal, parents are notified the same day, right? That's the expectation. And then our team will look, as we review these, we will determine whether it's a state mandated report that we have to provide, or if it's a federal aspect that we have to provide. But I put that aspect for federal mechanical restraint because that's often the one they're quite interested in, is like when handcuffs are used and the student's not arrested. They're interested in that. And the state says, hey, if it's a law enforcement part of their regular duties and they are planning to perhaps arrest and they handcuff, then those aren't something we necessarily have to report. Always nuances, but again, that's a broad view of what we have there for mechanical restraint. So seclusion. Here again is a question for us as a district and why this is an expectation for us as a school system. So why would we ever confine a student alone in a room involuntarily, preventing them from leaving? And let's be clear that there are certain aspects where the state, let's think about the state, and the definitions are very similar of what this looks like. The state says, look, if you have situations where you need to respond to a person to control a weapon or to break up a fight or there's some imminent threat, those are things that the state says, okay, understood, and that's not something that we necessarily have to report to the state. Again, we have to tell the families and notify them that day in written documentation. The federal government says really any time, right? They are physically prevented from leaving. They're alone in the room. That we need to ensure that we make the federal government aware of what that of what that looks like. And so overall, I want to highlight seclusion, that we want to avoid any situation where a student is involuntarily confined in a room by themselves and prevented from leaving. That is the absolute goal. And when we look at our data, that'll tell us what it's looking like, at least for last year, but wanted to clarify the distinctions between those two. So when looking at, before we get into the particular data, empowering every role, and the thought for me for this is, I would like to think if we know better, we're going to do better. And so we have to empower our staff to know what seclusion is, what restraint is, what they have to report. And it's also necessary to keep our parents and our extended community partners informed so they can help support students and accountability. And so that's the idea of empowering all employees. This year, the online legal training was updated, as Michelle Woodson said, with Barrington Smith. Furthermore, just to reiterate the professional learning that we are providing to all administrators. And we're confident that based on the data that we're going to share, it's going to just move us closer, right, to more precise reporting of seclusion or restraint, right? That's the key aspect here. And so when thinking about the core work and thinking about like the behavioral framework and thinking about these particular buckets for specifically seclusion or restraint, remember, incident reporting, right? We have to report families, communication. That is really the theme. And then the timeline. Schools, we have to report, we have to get into the system, and I've got to make sure that the state and federal government is completely aware of those particular reporting. All right, the next few slides, we're going to look into the data. And yes, there's a lot of data. So we're data rich in this sense. And you may have questions about, do we know this, or do we have any particular additional, and the answer probably is yes. These are just some overall snapshots of different aspects of the data. You see we labeled it really data 1, data 2, 3, and 4. So high level, and this is all 23, 24. So the way you look at this, acts of seclusion and restraint, right? The way you're reading that is 1,408 incidents, right? And now that you know, a reminder of what physical restraint, seclusion, and mechanical restraint looks like, that's the number of incidents that we have, not students, incidents of it, right? When looking at that data 2, acts, that's just a comparison of kind of the incidents per the kind of number of students we have, right? Just the idea. And remember, because it's a small number doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It's just keeping us having a baseline of what this looks like. We are very interested, data 3, right? By level. Where is it happening more? What are we seeing more, right? And you clearly see elementary, the most students, followed by middle school, and then we've got high school, so that's the number of students. Why do we disaggregate data by ethnicity, right, and race specifically, right? Because it gets interesting, right? And we now have to focus as to who are these students? Right, and this is what this does. And of course, you can see that our students that currently are last year most impacted are our Black African American students in the schools. And so that's what that data by subgroup is showing. All right, so another group, right, is specifically, we talk about students with disabilities, but this is students with an IEP, right, with an individual education program or plan. So when looking at elementary, middle, and high, what does that look like broken up by students with an IEP. So of course, what elementary does, here's the 259, and here's the particular students with or without an IEP. What do you clearly see, right? Students with an IEP are most impacted. And I expect that you're seeing the, for middle school, right, impacted, and then high school, it shifts. But we definitely see that students with an IEP are impacted more than some others here. All right, digging down a little bit more, right? Gender, when looking at this, elementary, middle, and high. When looking at elementary, again, the 259, looking at female versus male. You know, who are we seeing in a sense of gender for elementary and middle? You can see definitely male is impacted. High school, just about the same, but there's female in the high school that looks like they might be a little bit more impacted as well. And so subgroup and gender by with this particular data, it's really key as we drill down as to who are the 403 that is impacted by this data. One of the last data pieces, right, we really just added another view of this. And again, there's tons of ways that we can look at this information, but this is the involvement. So the way you really read this is per school, how many students have some type of seclusion or restraint. And so, for example, the tiered view by school is when you look at like less than 5. All right, less than 5, about 56% have about less than 5 occurrences. And then you look at by school, right? It's not all the particular schools that may have a particular incident as of last year, but at least you get an idea of what that looks like. For example, incidents by school might be about 50 or more, about 27, 28% might have that particular number with it. So lots of particular data regarding that. Looking forward to talking with you some more about that. But other than that, Dr. Wilson-Norman, I can pass it to you.
So as we continue to think about our work in the area of seclusion and restraint and overarching as part of our behavioral health framework, that we want to continue to strengthen our family and community connections through clear communication. That part of that, you'll see that we have committed to making sure that we share the data in September and February. So September will be the previous entire year, and then in February we'll share the fall semester, so that we will have a standard reporting process. That hosting special group sessions to share insights. And so thinking about how do we be able to share with the community, what does seclusion and restraint mean, who is being restrained, and providing an update on that data in small group sessions with family and community members. And then ensuring that we have consistent reporting. You've heard a lot about some of the measures we put in place for continuous improvement with really thinking about the professional development that we provide, making sure that we have a baseline that everyone receives, and then digging deep with our school administrators to make sure that everyone is highly trained. But continuing to look at what are some best practices that we need to engage, to utilize, to continue to ensure that we are reducing the number of students who are secluded or restrained as part of our practices. Again, as Dr. Walker shared, that's the last resort, and we want to continue to build other tools in the toolboxes for the educators in which we support. And so as we continue to think about our continuous improvement work, today we shared a snapshot of where we are, but the work doesn't stop here, that we still have more work to do. And so we wanted to take this time to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson-Norman, Dr. Walker, and Ms. Woodson, Dr. Woodson, for your insight and taking a deeper dive into this. We know that this is just the beginning and there's still more work for us to do, but also being transparent about what's happening in our schools and what steps we're taking to remedy these outcomes, and highlighting that seclusion and restraint is the absolute last option for our students to reduce the level of harm and trauma that our students face. So I'll open up to questions for my comments. Questions for my colleagues. There we are. Dr. Ng,
Yeah.
starting with you, and then Mr. Hershey.
No, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I am reminded that, this is the kind of a bird's eye view of what's going on. And I just want to remind everyone that, we have to think of it in the eyes of the children too, right? I mean, when it happens to that child, it's not just a statistic. It's actually, a reality for them, and that the experience of undergoing that is, can be kind of, affecting them for a long time. So we have to keep that in mind. Secondly, in terms of the staff training, I'm glad that we are having annual training. I do want to challenge you guys to think about how to do it in a way that is more individualized with the understanding of the particular classroom or the child. Because it's fine to watch a video, but it's not the same as in the setting of what's actually happening. And does it require a better understanding of how to diffuse a situation, to do some role playing kind of thing, where to kind of have a better understanding of how you as a staff person is feeling at the time and how you're responding to the situation. How is that going to impact that situation, and possibly provoking or aggravating the situation. So those are things that's important to think about. And it just in medical field, we have to take care of people who sometimes have behavioral issues as well. And when the nurse goes off shift and goes to and then the next nurse comes on, there's also always a handoff, right? There's a communication between staff members to let them know, okay, this is the situation, this is how this person is behaving, what makes it worse, what makes it better, and teachers in the classroom who are consistently there, they know what they're doing, right? But if a person just happens to be substituting, or a general ed teacher that happens to have that child may not have the full understanding of what may or may not provoke that child. So the handoff, I think, is a piece that we need to think about to be better able to prevent this from happening, but to need even the seclusion or the restraints, things like that. So just my ideas.
Thank you, Dr.
So a couple of things and a few questions. I would be interested in the slide 14 with data point 1, knowing like physical restraint and mechanical, how it differentiates between what is a state and federal one, since mechanical for federal specifically referenced handcuffs. I'm curious as to how many there are there. I'm assuming the physical restraint was a cumulative of either state or federal,
Correct.
based on the definition. So I love the breakdown of that. I think to Dr. Ng's point, a question would be, when an incident happens, a restraint or a seclusion, yes, we report it, but what is the training follow-up or actions with the staff member involved?
Yeah, specifically in the sense of when we have a particular report, and this is the getting better and having a team to really help respond, is we have ongoing professional support in the sense of our team that works on this daily. And so when we get a particular report of seclusion and or restraint, we do talk to the particular school. And in that particular conversation, it's already clarifying what happened in the sense of the seclusion or restraint. How did it get to the seclusion or restraint, right? And then ensuring the communication to families about it. But what does that rapport and relationship with the family look like at that point as you're communicating? That's the real reason why we got to talk to families. Is because if it were my child, I want to partner with you that day, not 5 days later, not 10 days later. I want to partner with you now, so I know how to work to prevent that. So that's the ongoing work. But then there's just continual professional learning that we're doing. We met with several schools in July and August. We're meeting more with schools this month, particularly about seclusion and restraint. And so we're talking about those aspects when we're aware. What do we do?
So is there an on-site visit for any of the 3 definitions if an incident happens? I think Dr. Ng's point of being there.
It possibly could. Most of it requires a conversation on the phone, but if it's something that we need to support the principal and follow through, then yes.
And the data is also helping us figure out where do we need to target. So when we look at those list of schools, there's some schools, if you're having multiple incidences, then you may need more direct training, on-site support. Whereas a school that maybe it's one incident, there's a particular situation, they've had a conversation, that may be different. But where we're seeing it's being used more often than needed, how do we provide tailored professional development?
Is part of the professional development, does part of it include kind of a wellness or I don't know how to phrase it. Maybe a staff member was in a bad place and that kind of led to the incident. So as part of, and they know better, but had a bad day, whatever the case is, there is an aspect of the follow-up that checks in, and maybe they've had this incident and it really is impacting them as much as it's impacting the child as well. Do we follow up with the behavioral health of or the health and well-being of the staff member as well as part of the review?
I mean, I think that's the role of the principal on a regular basis of maintaining and really monitoring the well-being of their school and of their staff members. And we certainly want to support that. We do have an amazing group of individuals that are a part of our HR team that work with the behavioral health of our staff. And if there was an incident that we felt like that impacted a staff member, we certainly could call them in as experts to help support in that way, and we would certainly do that. Okay. We do want to make sure that we're looking at the well-being of all students, but specifically these students in this situation, right? How do they feel? What does that look like? And in response a little bit to what Dr. Ng was indicating as well, we do have opportunities where we do create plans, where we specifically articulate we think this might be something that triggers a student, where that might make them escalate quickly, so that if I'm not here on that day, that Dr. Walker would know, okay, that's something that might set this student off, and this is something you need to know about. And if that does occur, what do we do? What is the safest thing we can do that won't even lead to an incident that hopefully would not cause seclusion or restraint to occur? So we do want to be as preventative in general behavioral health and in specific behavioral health around this as much as we can. I use this a lot with our principals, right? We talk about responding and prevention. The only way we're going to reduce the immediate responding is if we start to prevent, and we want to prevent more and more.
The last question for now is the elementary school number. I don't know the breakdown of how many elementary school students we have versus middle and versus high school, but I suspect it's not the same percentage as it is. So what are potential underlying reasons that, or not underlying reasons, what are potential reasons or underlying factors that cause that number to be substantially higher?
Yeah, that's a particular key question when looking at the particular roles. And I think that's something that we're continually needing to analyze, Mr. Hershey, really to be clear about that in the sense of the particular impact. And I want to say, as we continue to educate, I'm not sure that this is what it's going to look like. And so as we continue to get more data, I think that will be more telling in that sense. I will also say that perhaps some of the things of perhaps an elementary behavior support classroom in the elementary might be more prone, so that might also have an impact on it.
More prone in the sense of?
Sense of those particular settings.
Okay.
We've got a runner.
So one of the things I would add is that with elementary students, you're normally going to have a lot more kids that have not been in those settings where they've had an opportunity to manage those behaviors. And by the time they reach the middle and high school, we've got much more experience in how to deal with it. Those students also have gotten information about how not to let an event cycle out of control. So just imagine, a 5-year-old in kindergarten who's never been there versus someone who's in high school. And so that whole reaction may be different.
And that's why we go back to this slide, that this is so important to be more preventative and having all the pieces in place. And so when we think about support to classroom teachers around classroom management, we think about things around social emotional learning and how we help kids self-regulate. So that's why we want to ensure that this framework is really part of everything that incorporates mental health support, social emotional support, behavioral support, because it takes all of these things to ensure that we have a healthy environment. And so situations where you need to restrain or seclude or minimize or use as a last resort when we have lots of tools that we can respond to.
And this is, as we advocate to the state for funding, having those support staff, this is what we're talking about and why we need it. So I want to uplift that in this meeting at this moment.
In addition to that, the formula that the state uses as it relates to special education funding, because we know that is nearly 3 decades old at this point, so we need to, yeah, I can go on about
Right,
that.
and that's something that we've talked about. Like recently, Ms. Caulfield and I were in a meeting with some of our congressmen about that federal funding. I know it's not specifically related to this, but it's a good point that you raise about we need to differentiate funding for special education needs just as we differentiate the needs of the students.
Which it is directly, because then it also identifies how many more bodies we can have in the classroom.
That's true.
To help
Yeah.
ensure that every kid feels seen, safe, and that, again, this seclusion and restraint is the absolute last measure possible. So I saw Ms. Caulfield, and then I think a follow-up from Dr. Ng, and then, did you have any questions, Sherry?
They might get to
Okay.
it if not now.
So kind of, I guess, in conjunction with everything that was being said, and these sheets are very helpful to kind of break it down and understand and kind of get to the source of what it is that we're looking at to get a good picture. Are we collecting the data on, excuse me, the different instances to show us so that it could help us figure out where we need more help in the different situations? You look confused, so I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly. So say, for example, we have a runner, you said that. Do we have a certain amount of instances where you broke all this down where that's the type of seclusion? Or do we have somebody who's, doing something else so we know where we can fine tune what help we need?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
Okay.
exactly it. When we have an incident that the school provides, it's really in a narrative, and they really explain. And then we have to look at it and determine, what happened, right? How did it get here? What kind of restraint is it? And so, yes, we're able to really, in a granular sense, Ms. Caulfield, determine what it looks like. So, yes.
So, as you said, it's growing, and
Yes.
it'll continue to do so.
Think so.
That is something that we can have later on down the road,
Yes.
so that we can actually speak to people a little higher up that give us funding and give us Ready for both sides?
Dr. Ng, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah. I was just trying to kind of respond to Mr. Hershey's question about the elementary school and those higher numbers, and I wonder whether that has to do with the fact that there may be, for the children with IEPs, a delay in the language acquisition. They may be nonverbal or pre-verbal, where they're not understanding what you're trying to ask them to do, and therefore there's miscommunication or just misunderstanding of what is needed to be done in that situation. So that kind of exacerbates the problem if that child just does not understand properly what you're trying to say. When my child was growing up, we actually taught her sign language, American Sign Language, to help her, and I found that it was very useful for a lot of my parents that also have kids with Down syndrome, that we were using sign language as a way to help them to be able to communicate without having actually being verbal yet. And so, just some of those things, and I don't know how many of our teachers are actually, able to or have some skills in sign language. Maybe that's something that's a part of the educational value for the staff.
We don't have many, because even as we're looking in our deaf and hard of hearing programs, but that is something that we can begin to think about. How do we reduce those numbers at elementary?
I know, again, we're making progress, but there's still more work that can be done, and I think Dr. Wilson-Norman and I had a conversation about this on Friday about the trainings, just ensuring that it's not just the principals that are getting trained, it's those assistant principals that may be over special education, or those department chairs that touch all of the regular ed students. I'm looking from a high school perspective when I taught, making sure there was more folks trained in the building, and I think that was a concern when this came up last year before Student Achievement Committee, was make sure that we're training and holding as many teachers in the building accountable. And then also utilizing our BACs as an opportunity to touch more folks besides the 2 times that this is the September and February, when this is going to come before this committee, but also making sure we have 9 board advisory committee meetings, and it's an opportunity for us to continue to get out in the public and just be transparent about the data. And the last thing that we have mentioned was, of course, I think it's on the slide that talks about hosting special interest groups and sessions. One thing that I would like to see is that would potentially be housed up under Dr. Wilson-Norman's camp, since special education directly is connected to to academics. Therefore, there's an opportunity for those families to see, how this is not just connected to special education, but the whole entire academics as well, and giving them some engagement through that end. And again, I think that we have to continue doing this, and I know that this may be, for some teachers that don't necessarily like to do a lot of trainings, this is one of those things that, in order for us to do better, we have to know better. And so I'm thankful for you all for bringing this up, and this will not be the last time, and I'm hoping that when we bring this back, to some of those numbers, especially the elementary piece, we may see some decreases in there. And so there's no final comments or questions. Looks like.
I don't want to drag out the discussion beyond just the organized agenda that was set, but as you know, this is an important part of our services to many students, as you saw from the number of students that have IEPs or 504 plans. They're disproportionately represented among the students that might face seclusion and restraint. And so this is something we've worked with Dr. Taylor on in terms of just district direction, that we really need to prioritize services and our policies for assisting those students. So this is just another example of that. So as Dr. Wilson-Norman always likes to do at the beginning, assigning the work to a specific item in the strategic plan, I think we can see that represented here.
I believe Ms. Hershey had one final question.
Just final question. You know, we do the professional development for teachers, and then we talk to parents when an incident happens. Are we able to provide additional resources to parents? Because it really is, could be, you know, it can be hard at home. And how do we make sure we're supporting the parent too, who can then, or the family, and can maybe then help support the child a little bit better? Are we able to point them in the direction of resources?
Our student support services teams, as well as special education educators, I mean, that's a part of what we do, that we want to make sure that we are connecting families with the resources that they need to be successful both at home and at school. That's how we partner together, right? We need to make sure that we're doing that. Whenever there is a concern, we want to make sure that is easily accessible, and that we make sure that we are building those bridges with families so that they can experience the same, hopefully the same successes at home and at school. Will both be successful if that happens.
Thank you, Ms. Response. Thank you, Stacy.
Our next item is about empowering educators. That we hear and work with our teachers a lot, and we want to make sure that we're providing them with the tools that they need to be successful in the classroom. And so we want to talk to you today about an impact on our curriculum redesign. That we've heard a lot from teachers about, we have lots of wonderful tools and materials to support them, but sometimes it can be very difficult to organize and figure out how to use those things. And as we add more, we felt like it was time for us to take a moment to streamline. And that's what this presentation walks us through. And so as we think about clearly communicating the reason behind our curriculum redesign, we want to share that with you today. We also want to demonstrate how the curriculum redesign will support teachers in their delivery of instruction, and at the end of the day, improve student outcomes. And then highlight how the curriculum design is a structured approach to showcase its benefits around providing clarity and consistency from building to building and classroom to classroom. And so we have aligned the work of the curriculum redesign to our strategic plan. And as we think about high-quality instructional core for content areas, that we know that what happens in the classroom articulates and sets students on to success, on the path for success. And so ensuring that teachers deliver high-quality, standards-driven instruction that is culturally responsive is very important as we begin to look at how do we improve our proficiency of all students. And then we also wanted to align that since the pandemic, there's been a lot of talk about behavioral health, social emotional learning, mental health. And we want to really take the opportunity to, instead of making something additional for teachers, to begin to look at how can we align the two things so that it's not seen in addition to, but part of. And so creating a seamless approach. That we know that the resources students are given shape what they're able to achieve. Different resources lead to vastly different results. And so we know that we can do at the district office provide a service to schools by really aligning the curriculum documents and streamlining them so that they're more useful for teachers. And so as we think about providing a different resource, that we hope that it will propel us to achieve the goals in our strategic plan and achieve different results. When we think about what some of the research says, that students need 4 key resources in their daily school experiences. They need consistent opportunities to work on grade level assignments. We talk a lot about intervention, a lot about reteaching, but students must be exposed to grade level assignments, and we have to scaffold from there. So if you're in the 4th grade, you need to be exposed to 4th grade materials, that you may need additional support, but we have to think about how do we go about doing that and exposing you to those materials. That you have to have strong instruction. How do we use instructional strategies to really help you access those materials? And then deep engagement. How do we really engage students deeply around the content? And that's what we want to see when we think about our learning model in every single classroom in every single school. And then we want to hold teachers to high expectations. And so our curriculum documents help us do these 4 things. It helps us articulate what is important at each grade level. What does strong instruction look like? What are the expectations for the teachers and PLCs? And how do we engage our students deeply in the content? And so when we think about our curriculum redesign process, Mr. Cook will walk you through our process and provide you on some of the connections it has to policy.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson-Norman. So first of all, I just want to say this is really the core of our work, and we hear that term a lot, and I think as Dr. Wilson-Norman just pointed out, we do spend a lot of time rightfully about interventions and extensions and accelerative opportunities. And ultimately, though, the core of our business is first learning, core instruction is provided in our classrooms during the regular instructional day and regular instructional hours. And every bit of research that's out there, we know, points out the fact that the more effective that first time learning is, then the more effective the entire process of learning is. And we can better target and differentiate if we've got fewer kids that need extensions or fewer kids that need interventions. All of it becomes much more effective for every individual student. So that's really the priority behind this work. I'll share a little bit about the curriculum redesign process, including we'll define what the term curriculum and redesign mean and what they also do not mean. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of engaging in this work, the key principles that we want to focus on with the project that we now have ongoing that Dr. Kendra King will share more about in just a few minutes. But also we want to highlight some of those important factors and considerations that guide our work when it comes to curriculum procurement and redesign, but also the ongoing updates and the work that both the district and our teachers every single day in schools are engaged in to refine and make better whatever content, curriculum resources they have access to. And that's really our goal. So this slide kind of defines terms a little bit. Sometimes it is easy for folks, I think, to get these 2 terms juxtaposed or confused. There is a difference when we talk about standards versus curriculum. So to frame our conversation, it is important to note that our standards of learning, certainly as our board knows and understands, are defined by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. These standards are intended to provide a real uniform set of standards and guidelines for every single public school in North Carolina. These standards define the what, really, of what we want our students to know, and we also want to be able to define what we want them to be able to do by the end of a course or by the end of a school year. And obviously that is the heart of our responsibility as educators. The curriculum are the resources and materials used by a teacher, by a school, by a district that really are a standards-based sequence of planned experiences. And the goal ultimately, obviously, is to achieve proficiency in content, but also those applied learning skills. The structure, organization, and considerations in the curriculum are created in order to enhance learning and obviously to facilitate instruction. So sometimes curriculum, as you know and understand, can be a comprehensive district-wide procurement. Something, for example, that we go through a multi-year procurement process, vetting process. Examples of that would be things like EL education, open up resources in mathematics, for example, district-wide procure curricula. But oftentimes, and perhaps more often, curriculum and instructional resources are kind of an ongoing process of vetting, procuring, developing, refining, and synthesizing both at the district and at the school level. And so that's part of what we'll be talking a little bit about today. And sometimes it's both, right? Sometimes, and I think part of what we'll be sharing, even procured resources like EL and like Open Up Mathematics can have modifications and extensions built in both at the district and the school level to meet the needs of an individual student or even individual classrooms. The other item that we wanted to point out on this slide, just for your re-reference as needed, we do have, as you know, board policy that guides some of this work. One certainly applicable policy today in this conversation is policy 3100. You'll note in that policy, and as the slide points out, I think this was updated the last time back in 2017. There is language in here that stipulates the superintendent shall appoint a curriculum committee to coordinate and lead this work on an ongoing basis. I will point out that after this policy was developed, I think in around 2017, we actually as a district have created an office. That's the reason Dr. Kendra King is here today. But we have a curriculum instruction and assessment office, and that is their core responsibility on a regular, ongoing basis. And we'll talk a little bit more about the groups that are brought into that process that cover this policy. But I did want to point out, we're not kind of creating an ad hoc committee every time there's a procurement or something that needs to be refined or developed. We actually are fortunate in Wake to have a full-time team within the academics department that does this work year-round. So I wanted to call that out. So quickly, the next two slides really do lay out the why behind this work, both the principles and some of our key priorities. Here you see some of those key principles of the redesign work that we're engaging in. First of all, we want any materials that we're putting out into our schools to be user-centered. And specifically, yes, we want those materials to be relevant and accessible by students, but ultimately, the teacher is the practitioner. And so when curriculum materials are being developed, every decision has to be made and vetted and thought through with teachers ultimately in mind. And we want the materials to be consumable and also comprehensive when it comes to alignment with our standards. When we're doing this work, we obviously want to create efficiencies and not inefficiencies. The last thing that we want to do when we're developing and spending time and effort at the district level with this work are create content and materials that teachers find cumbersome or burdensome in some way, or things that they are constantly finding that they have to feel like they need to refine or redevelop on their own, which, as you know and understand, takes countless hours and time away from other opportunities to truly dive in and differentiate instruction on a personalized level for students. So the more of that work that we can take off the plate of teachers and schools at the district level, obviously the more time they have to devote to their craft and really meeting the individual needs of our students. And then the last principle here that you see focuses on integrating student wellness. Obviously that has always been an important topic that's foundational to academic achievement and academic success. I think this board understands well and recognizes post-pandemic, this is even a deeper priority in terms of student wellness. If we've got kids that are in places other than that classroom mentally, right, or social emotionally, then it's really, really hard for there to be effective instruction and learning that's taking place. I would point out that it's really our role and responsibility. Yes, it's important to have all the wonderful counseling programs and student support services and the other opportunities that we can connect families with, other programs and initiatives, but again, in the spirit of first learning, core instruction, we can also build those opportunities into the classroom experience aligned with the standards and the curriculum that we're providing to kids in the classroom during the regular instructional day. So that's a big piece of the work moving forward as well. So then on this next slide, 3 priorities that we'll point out. First of all, we do want to provide clarity around the learning targets for each standard. So Dr. King and her team right now are engaged in really going back and reviewing content and lessons and resources and materials that the district provides to schools to make sure that those learning targets are clear. And just to be clear about what a learning target is, it really refers to the knowledge and skills that a student is expected to master and learn. And it's really important, and research bears this out, to call out what that learning target is. In fact, today, if you were to walk classrooms, we walked some classrooms yesterday at an elementary school, you can see learning targets clearly posted on boards or around classrooms where teachers are drawing back to that consistently with their students. I think I heard one teacher refer to a learning target almost like a GPS. It's really a definition of where you want to go and where your destination is. And I think the curriculum that goes along with that learning target is the sequence of events that occur to get there. And I want to call out, as you know, with a GPS, there can be 4 or 5 different routes to get you to the same destination. That could very well be the case, all with maybe in a minute or two of each other. But there's also times when there's one route, or there's one route that's clearly the best sequence to get to a destination, and that's part of our work at the district level as well, is to help teachers with that process and take some of that work off of their plate. Priority number 2 is really to provide clarity around grade level assignments. You heard Dr. Wilson Norman mention a minute ago. This is an overlooked, I think, critical measure that sometimes does not get the attention that it deserves. And I think sometimes many parents and perhaps community members assume that because a student maybe is below grade level on a particular task or learning objective, that automatically means that they should be receiving below grade level instruction or below grade level content. The research is the opposite of that, right? We know and recognize that it's our goal to make sure those gaps are filled, and that's much easier said than done. But we want to be clear about what grade level assignments look like that are attached to these standards. We know that all students can be successful with access to strong resources and instruction. And current research shows that providing students with grade level assignments and the necessary supports, importantly, for mastery produces positive learning outcomes irrespective of where a student might be in terms of their level of mastery. And then third priority here that you see in terms of this work is to provide clarity around extensions and scaffolding for students. You probably know scaffolding is really breaking up the learning into chunks and providing a tool or a structure for each chunk of learning. In other words, rather than just kind of rolling it all out and letting students just dive in, there are ways to break that content up in an effort to make it much more accessible. In fact, even in adult professional learning, it's well known and understood that sometimes, give us 5 minutes to maybe turn and talk and discuss a topic to learn what we maybe already know about it, which automatically creates an atmosphere and an environment maybe that's much more engaging and much less intimidating for a student who may presume they don't know very much. And conversation is an easy way to do that. Things like tapping into prior knowledge. Pre-teaching vocabulary is another example of an important scaffold that can be built in. Visual aids, graphic organizers are other examples. And by the way, I don't want to oversimplify, right? Those are some kind of, simplistic approaches. Oftentimes teachers find they have everything that they have in their toolbox and they're throwing it out there, and they're still meeting students where they're not having success, and that's where additional extended learning opportunities would need to be deployed. And that's part of the work of our district team as well, to help with what those strategies are when teachers have literally tried everything and aren't having the level of success with every student that they want to have. So that's a quick overview again of the why, and at this time I'm going to, I think, introduce you as a board for the first time to Dr. Kendra King, who I believe, Kendra, is on month 4 in the Wake County Public School System after joining us from DPI and having led several other districts, both in curriculum, both as a school and building leader at the principal level. But Dr. King is leading our curriculum instruction and assessment team. She's also kind of been passed the baton from Ms. Woodson, who is still in the room, I believe, in terms of moving this work forward. And so Dr. King will share a little bit more about the process involved in the redesign effort that right now is ongoing, including timeline, but also kind of rollout plans and communications, which I think our board knows and understands is vital, because the last thing we want to do is do all this work and not have our 10,000 plus teachers be aware that the resources are there, but also to be sure that they find them usable and accessible for their classrooms and for their students. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Kendra King.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. And as Mr. Cook said, I will be speaking to you about the implementation plan with our timeline and our strategies. So first, let's discuss the implementation. We have made incredible strides in designing our curriculum maps with a collaborative effort. Our district members have included, of course, the curriculum instruction and assessment team, along with staff from our AIG program and our special education program, ESL, as well as behavioral health. We've also had various content experts. They all have been actively involved in the process. Instructional coaches, grade level lead teachers, and school leaders have worked alongside them, the content leads, to ensure our curriculum maps are comprehensive and aligned with the priorities and principles that Mr. Cook talked about. On your slide in front of you, this is an example of our curriculum map template. I would like to ask for you to please notice the lesson book boards because they're designed to align with our learning model. It's focusing on challenge me, see me, engage me, and know me. This alignment is crucial as it ensures that our instructional strategies meet the diverse needs of our students. Moving on with our timeline, we will release the new kindergarten to 8th grade curriculum maps for ELA and math on the Canvas landing page, and it will be for quarter 2, which will be for September 19th. Then the rollout will continue in alignment with our year-round school calendar with the release of quarter 3 on December 13th. We will enter the final rollout of the phase for the 24-25 school year by releasing quarter 4 on March 14th. We will then provide a preview really and a preparation for the next academic school year to ensure a smooth transition by releasing quarter 1 on May 1st. Of course, effective communication is key to success. So we will have brief communications in different formats, with newsletters, emails, Wake Connect to inform everyone of the rollout. We also are developing an FAQ, frequently asked questions, to address common concerns and address questions proactively. There will be a comprehensive training. A training video will be produced to include an overview of the curriculum map for easier navigation. There's the Canvas landing page. It will serve as a central hub for all the curriculum maps, the standards, as well as additional support materials that I already mentioned that will launch on September 19th. Ongoing support will be provided through virtual office hours that are scheduled throughout the month of October, and that will be live virtual Q&A sessions, and that's just continual guidance. Then we will also provide communication with our advisories to give them a chance to vet and give us input in the work that we are continuing to refine with our curriculum documents. Let's talk about this initiative as it has been set up to make a significant impact on our educational community. For our teachers, they will benefit from clear, consistent guidelines for grade level instruction. They're going to have ready-to-use lessons, scaffolding that caters to the diverse needs or diverse learners that we have, and be able to integrate student wellness into daily instruction. For staff who support instruction, there will be expanded tools for their professional learning communities or PLCs, specialized training for student wellness implementation, and then strategies for providing targeted student intervention and enrichment that will be incorporated. So now I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Wilson.
So as we think about next steps, we talked a lot about K-8 is what the initial rollout addresses. And so while the work will be ongoing always for K-8, as we hear back from teachers, as we make iterations, as we expand to science and social studies. But we will begin thinking about 9, 12 and additional subject areas this fall so that we can start to introduce a rollout for our high schools as well, aligned to the learning model, streamlined, and really focused on grade level work. But we felt we needed to start somewhere, and so we started with K-8. And so we are ready to launch our ELA and math curriculum documents. And then in December, we'll do a check-in and a progress update on how is it going with our teachers, feedback, and continuing to keep that feedback loop going. One thing about curriculum and instruction, that the documents are created, but the goal is that they're continually enhanced throughout the life cycle of an adoption. So teachers will give us feedback on, this was great, can you tweak this? And we want that to be ongoing feedback where we're continuing to enhance the documents to meet their needs. But the goal is to ensure that we have a streamlined focus, that it is focused on core instruction, and that we're marrying wellness with academics. So that is the premise of really trying to overhaul our documents based on some of the feedback that we've heard from teachers. And so we'll take any questions that you guys may have about the process, the documents, or the purpose.
Well, thank you so much, and welcome, Dr. King. It's great to meet you, and excited about the work that you all are doing and going to continue to do, and how this is going to really help move the district forward and help us meet those goals towards our student achievement and our strategic plan. So let's see a question for Mr. Hershey and Chair Haggerty.
First, I love this work. I hope that, like the previous presentation, that this is going to come back for an update, because I think this is fantastic. I would definitely have made slide 11 2 slides, because it is hard to read. Question, as far as the rollout goes, when you say teachers, does that include instructional assistants, principals, assistant principals?
It includes principals, assistant principals, instructional facilitators, classroom teachers. We haven't gotten to teacher assistants yet. We have to think about a mechanism for how do we train them from our lens, but those other groups are factored into the rollout and training.
And I hope we get to them relatively quickly, because I know in some schools, a teacher assistant will end up subbing. That's pretty common. How do we ensure that, given that this rollout is happening in the middle of the year, that teachers and staff aren't overwhelmed, or, well, I'll just leave it as overwhelmed with a new process? And I say that as not knowing how drastically different it is. So that's part of it too, but kind of, we just want to get some feedback on it.
What we've tried to do is still the same curriculum, but we've tried to streamline it.
Right.
And so where they would be doing second step, which is a social emotional learning curriculum, that they'd have to go to another map. Or they may have a math map that looks totally different than the one map. So in some ways, it should really simplify, but I don't want to underestimate that it is a change. But the goal is to prevent them from having to go 3 places to implement things, that they can start in one place. And that every map looks the same. So before, the mathematics team, their curriculum map looked totally different from the ELA map. The science map looked totally different. And so really trying to streamline.
Yeah.
The goal would have been to roll this out in May, but we're just not ready. And so we're looking at kind of an ongoing rollout, and we'll drop Q1 in May. So next year, they'll have all summer to get ready.
Well, I appreciate you not rushing, so I love that you waited. I'm really excited about this. And so this is a question you may not be able to answer now, but there's, you talked about looking at K through 9 and different subjects. Is this a 4-year plan to kind of get through? Is that kind of I'm just kind of creating some expectations of, I think this is going to be great for our students and for our teachers. How long does it take to overhaul the entire curriculum?
It will be ongoing because, for example, we will bring back another presentation with the timeline of when we procure new resources.
Okay.
So every time, like science will be up next. So science will have to be done for teachers. When, ELA will be up soon. So it's ongoing. But this is the work of the curriculum team. And so as we are beginning to look at how are we coordinated, and so do teachers know when, science will be coming up. Here's when you'll have new maps and new materials. We will share that in I don't know if it's in November. We'll share the timeline and roadmap so that, I guess what I would say about Mr. Hershey is never ending. That we will have to continue to make tweaks, but we will all know when is science ready, when will math be redone, those sorts of things.
I just hope we can highlight this. I've mentioned this earlier today and put it, I'm really happy with my colleague, Mr. Swanson, for bringing this, letting the community know this great work that's going on, I think is essential to telling our message as what we're doing as a school system. I think this is excellent work, and I'm excited to see this through and see what happens in the future.
Mr. Hershey, I will just add to extend that thought, because I want to highlight what Dr. Wilson Norman just shared, and I think kind of the part of the purpose of your question. One of the lessons that we have learned in past implementations is the importance of a long runway for implementation, right? And so I think to answer your question, to extend what Dr. Wilson Norman just shared, the school year has started, right? The school year started back in July. And so we're going to be really cautious about walking that fine line between, you know, balancing the fact that school is happening. Teachers are teaching. They're planning right now for lessons next week and next month. And so we view this year as really an opportunity for that initial implementation. We do want and expect the resources to be utilized, but there's not going to be somebody from central office coming out to a classroom and wagging our fingers or wondering why somebody's not using every single resource with 100% fidelity right away. And in part, I mean, these are still things that are being developed and refined. And so I think that's really important to call out. There is urgency anytime we're talking about, you know, the opportunity to be better. But I think we've also learned historically that, you know, the way to be better is to do this in a really methodical, strategic way over time. And that's how really significant change takes hold.
Great. Love it.
Chair Harry?
Thank you. For the benefit of my colleagues here, Ms. Woodson, Mr. Cook, and some others know that we've been through just some issues with new curriculum in the past, and I've still got scars I'm not going to show anybody. I know that you all have them too. And so anytime when we talk about new curriculum, you know, I'll be the first to admit that a lot of the science behind it is just simply over my head. I don't have the over my head.
Okay.
I don't have the full professional background to understand all of the strategies that go into it. So when I get a presentation like this, it all looks very positive and very encouraging. But at the same time, I have other questions that aren't addressed, and I'm not exactly sure if this is the right time to address them or not. Generally, when we talk about a change to curriculum, you know, it seems like that can take a lot of different forms. I mean, a wide spectrum of forms. And just so that I understand it, you know, our standards are the shared learning goals, kind of the results mandated by the state. If the state says for healthful living, we're going to teach that vaping is bad, then we're required to go out and find materials, texts or videos, online programs, exercises that help convey that message in an age-appropriate way to the children, right? So with that understanding, I'm with you. But then when we talk about changing curriculum K through 8, we know we're guided by the state standards for each subject, for each grade. But it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that could be as simple as just going out and finding like a science textbook that includes and incorporates those new standards, and everyone just simply teaches lessons from the new science book, to proposing a very new and very different method of teaching the content, you know, backed up by the latest science and the latest recommendations. But so, for example, rather than just a new curriculum meaning a new science book, it might mean, hypothetically, we're going to do all of our science education only online or with computers rather than in a more traditional method. And I know that sometimes when we have a big change, not in what we teach, but in how we teach, you get a lot of questions in the community, questions from staff, uncertainty about, well, these are tried and true methods that we've always used. You're asking me to teach a different way, or you're asking me as a parent to have to learn a new way to assist my child. It's the Common Core argument, the new math argument. Why do we have to fill in these boxes or count sticks when I can just tell you how to do long division, right? So as we go forward with these presentations and unroll the timeline, it would help me as a board member, and I don't know about the rest of you, if you could maybe bring us like a hypothetical to just show, here's a grade and a topic where we would be going in, and here's what it could look like, or here's what it might look like, so that we're all on the same page, understand what these changes might mean, not committing to anything in particular, but just something to help illustrate it. I think that would help me really understand it a lot better. And then as I go out and talk to parents or teachers who hear about a new curriculum coming, I can make sure I'm representing it accurately.
So Mr. Hagerty, I think that was really an excellent way to get people to understand how curriculum is implemented, the continuous changes that take place, and how very difficult this work is. And so when you talk about a standard being put out, and then the selection of a curriculum, which is part of the conversation that we talked about, that it is about selecting what is the best way that we implement the curriculum to meet those standards. We know that companies that publish curriculum material, they're going to make sure, at least they say to us, that it meets all the standards and it checks all the boxes that the state has. And so that means that there's going to be a selection to that curriculum. And then we have to deal with how might teachers be involved with accepting or rejecting what that new curriculum is, what it asks them to do different than what they've already been doing. And then how they're involved in that process, and then what type of process do we have at school to monitor that the curriculum is being implemented as intended. And so all of these things, that great confluence, could absolutely make a curriculum something that's good or something that's bad, depending on that implementation. And then when we talk about where we are as parents, what we learned about long division versus what we know about teaching and learning now, and those new standards that come into place, that creates some conflict for parents as well. We had that conversation today. And so it makes all of this very difficult if it's not coordinated in a specific way. And that is what I'm excited about with what I see with the curriculum department, because people know I'm all about teaching and learning. And I haven't had to say much because of my chief here. And when I see it, I just get in line. And so, Dr. Wilson, I know you got some comments you want to make, but I'm super excited about it, and this is what I look for when I go into classrooms. What does the instruction look like? What are we doing to ask teachers to enhance what it is that they're doing? Helping them to understand what they might need to give up or abandon that's no longer effective. And that is a very difficult process. I'm a school teacher, and I believe what I believe, and it's hard for me to change sometimes, but sometimes we need that help. And so with that, I've been talking about this for a long time, but I'll let my chief.
And I think what I want to make sure that we're clear on, what we're talking about today is we don't have any new curriculum materials. What we have done is cleaned up what we have to streamline it. When we come back in November, we really want to share, we have a procurement process, but I think from some of the scars and experiences, one of the things that we recognized is that scope and scale, that we want to make sure that we have enough time where teachers are able to be a part of the selection. We have enough teachers who are part of it, that we have the community that's a part of it. And so we'll bring back a new procurement process. And in that process, we'll have a timeline of, here's where the state's, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction is changing the standards for ELA. Here's when we might adopt. But what we want to share and get feedback on, and we will do this with teachers, we'll bring it to the board on our procurement process, so that who is involved, how long does it take, who gets to see the materials, who gets to give input. That is what we'll bring back in November, because the state is updating the math curriculum, the ELA curriculum, science has been updated. And we want to make sure that we all understand the process, so that when it's time to select, that the right people have been included, the right number of people have been included, it's been a transparent process, and that there's clarity around when does the new material come in place, when am I expected to use it, just all of those things that we think about lessons learned, that we want to ensure that before we buy anything, that we're all on the same page. Today's presentation is the same curriculum that was already purchased, but just streamlining it so that when we bring in new things, we have a process for how it looks the same, how teachers know how to approach it, all of those things. So this is kind of a precursor before any new purchase is made.
Yeah, so, yeah, that was helpful to understand. I think I would really love to be the fly on the wall in listening into the decision-making on what kind of factors you think about when you're making those decisions. And I know that the community would like to know, for the sake of transparency, to know what it is that, how are we deciding what kind of curriculum we may want to procure in the future. I wasn't part of this, in the years past, but, our previous board member was elected in part because she was so strong in her opinion about the math curriculum. And, my question I had was, we talk about having grade level, what was it?
Assignments?
Grade appropriate assignments.
Assignments.
Yeah. But then at the same time, we have to think about our AIG and the special ed, and how do you kind of mesh everything together to fit everybody's needs, right? I have a school at West Millbrook that they pride themselves in their compressed math, so how do we, are able to fit all those niche areas in?
Which is the grade level. And then you extend, for those who are AIG and gifted, we have built-in extensions, and then for those who need additional help, scaffolding. But I think what we're trying to say is that everyone needs to be exposed to the standard first. And if I'm already above the standard, then by all means extend me. But if I'm not at the standard, how are you going to scaffold so that I can approach the standard? What we see a lot of times is when groups of students aren't doing well on EOGs and EOCs, they've never been exposed to the grade level curriculum, that they spend all their time being instructed below grade level. But that assessment is going to be all on grade level. And so really thinking about what does core instruction look like, where do we start, and then how do we make adjustments based on the child?
And so that's the difficult part of the teaching process. And what Dr. Wilson-Norman has shared is absolutely right, that the experience has been that we want to go back and try to remediate and intervene on gaps that are in place. But they're going to see that grade level curriculum or assessments at the end of the year. And so if we don't do our due diligence to expose them to that, we may close the gap, but we haven't done the work necessary to prepare them for where they're going to be assessed on at the end of the year. In addition to that, when you talk about kids being at different levels, that is the tough part of teaching. Because if I have an AIG kid, I don't want you teaching to the core. I want you to extend the child, as Dr. Wilson-Norman has said. But if there's a kid that's below, as a parent, I have that concern as well. So that's all part of the teaching and learning strategies that we want people to know. And so the example might be, you're very proficient at, say, the quadratic equation. I'll just make something up. But the best way that you retain knowledge, you retain 90% of what you teach someone else. And so that means that if a teacher recognizes that a student is really proficient at something, then part of the work that they might do might be working with other students, sharing knowledge, teaching in some small way, because that's going to help them have even greater retention and growth in that particular area. And so that is the toughest thing about teaching is how do you avoid teaching to the middle and not getting the kids that are below or above. Again, we had that conversation. So that's the tough part.
Agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging.
And also keep in mind that some of our students who are special education are also AIG. So the teacher's role is to differentiate the learning and ensure that every kid is being met, seen, and challenged. And Ms. Caulfield, I know you had a question, so I'll reserve mine. So.
I don't know if we weren't going in the same direction, but I was going to ask, where do we get our resources when we choose something like this? Like you mentioned that it's not a new curriculum, but I know the state is working on a new math setup.
So the new math standards, I think,
Yes.
maybe come out in 2 or 3 years. So new standards will come out.
2 or 3 years,
Mhm.
which is a long time.
It is, but in November, we will provide you with the timeline for all of the standards. So science has just been redone,
Helpful living.
healthful living, I think maybe arts is next, and then maybe either it's ELA or maths. There's one big one that's next.
Okay. So that'll definitely be helpful to understand and to have these communications, with the public and stuff. How do we get our teachers involved with, you did talk about the teachers a little bit, but seeing as they're the ones who are in the classroom, see it's effective, how do we get them involved in the conversation? Like, how does that look for you?
They are actually part of the writing teams.
They are good.
So they're part of the writing teams. And something that we want to put in place is that where we can collect feedback all along. So someone's using a unit, this would be easier if the curriculum team can make those adjustments. And that's why we say it's ongoing, because we will start with this as a baseline, but teachers have great ideas. And how can it be made better? And so we use our IFs and our teachers to really inform the work. We want to do the heavy lifting for them, but how do they have a seat at the table to say, that wasn't helpful, don't know what you guys were thinking, we like it better like this. We're open to making those adjustments, but they were part of the initial writing team.
Awesome. Okay. And how, when we're rewriting or adjusting or evaluating our curriculum, how often do we, in a typical setting, I know elementary, middle will be very different from high school, do our assessments to find out if our children, I mean, I know it's ongoing in the classroom, but at what point do we start to intervene? How often does that happen?
It happens, it depends on the grade level, but it's say if you're K2. So if your M-class assessment will kind of articulate some things that should happen. So if you're below grade level, then you have an amount of time in which you need to progress monitor. And based on that progress monitoring, there are some things that you need to do. K2 is probably the most intense assessment cycle. Then when you get to grades 3 through 5, or really, I guess 4 through 8, you have formative assessments like NC check-ins, which is designed by the Department of Public Instruction, standards-based. And when we say standards-based, that means they're checking understanding based on the standards for that grade level. The district does something called STAR Reading and STAR Math. They're looking for skills. So what skills are you struggling with that might prevent you from being successful at the next level? And so based on that data, STAR is done 3 times per year, and NC check-ins are done 3 times per year. So as you get older, they're checking skills and standards. So what might you need as a learner to be successful at the next grade level, and then the check-ins are what do you know about the content that you're going to be assessed on? And then they can intervene based on kind of those findings.
Okay, thank you.
So I think this has been a very positive and helpful dialogue. I really think something that stood out to me with this presentation was on slide 5 with the 4 key resources, especially number 4 that says teachers hold high expectations for students and truly believe that they can meet grade level standards. Oftentimes, some teachers may feel as if a student has a various learning background that they have to lower those standards, which even when I was in the classroom was always against my core belief, because you never lower your expectations. You help push students to meet their potential and meet your expectation. Doesn't mean that that often means that you may stifle some assignments or whatnot, but never lowering those expectations, because our students have to often see the curriculum and believe it before they can actually achieve it. So I think it's both bad scenarios. So this has been extremely helpful. And I also think it's important to know that we don't do anything that goes against the state standards. We don't have that jurisdiction or that power to just decide to go off scale because we don't agree with what the state DPI is laying out and whatnot. And so thank you for this presentation. Some very great things is coming forward, and look forward to those updates in November. And I believe our next meeting is October 8th October 8th. Making sure I have that correct. Perfect. So thank you all, and I think we get 20 minutes back of our time if there's no other questions. So I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 4:40.
Well done.